thank you all for coming. Thanks for being here bright and early on a Thursday. We are so excited to be here. Thank you to eMarketer for hosting us. This is such a great room. And we're excited to talk about digital audio. So obviously, we've seen the transformation in audio. This channel is exploding. I think we liken it to what happened with television, right? Where we went from this linear ecosystem to connected television and CTV. And that digital transformation just allows us to do so much more with it. I feel like when I think about digital audio, I think it's, to me, even more interesting in some ways than CTV because it's more personal. So for those of you who were out in market with me 12, 15 years ago, trying to teach people why mobile was a thing and important, the story that we were telling was it's the most personal device ever, right? You're carrying it around. It's, you're not co-viewing on it. It's your phone, your apps are on it. And I think audio is a similar story, right? There's certainly a case where there's smart speakers and there are multiple people listening to it sometimes, but a lot of the time it's happening in your headphones, your personal interests, whatever rabbit hole you're down that week in the podcast world, and it's really personal. And that means it's also more targetable and more measurable. And that measurability piece is what's really interesting for GroundTruth because everything we do, we want to be able to be helping our advertisers spend media smartly, said that sentence not smartly, to get real business results, like store visits, like foot traffic, and we can do that now with audio. So that's why it's really exciting to us. We are going to dig into the landscape with Ethan from eMarketer, and then we're gonna have a discussion with Matt Knight, who is my Chief Technology Officer at GroundTruth, and the lovely Jeff Bell, who is from Gary's QuickSteak. He leads marketing there. And we're gonna do a little kind of roundtable discussion, get into it a little bit. There will be Q&A at the end, so please ask questions. Don't make us sit here. But come up with your questions along the way, and I think we'll just get started. So Ethan, you wanna take it away?
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. So my name is Ethan Cramer-Flood. I am the principal forecasting writer here at eMarketer. And a part of my role as the principal forecasting writer is to communicate, explain, and illuminate the full range of forecasts that eMarketer is known for. If you're here, you probably have some idea of what I'm talking about. So we have a huge team behind me, and all credit to them for coming up with these amazing numbers that you're about to see. So eMarketer, of course, covers a broad array of media-related topics, but today we are, of course, here to talk about digital audio. So what's gonna happen is I'm gonna spend hopefully about 15 minutes in giving you a nice deluge of data and numbers and projections that will help us set the table and do a little market sizing for the conversation that's to come. Although I have to warn you that last night when I was prepping this, it was taking me like a half an hour to get through this presentation, so we're all part of a little experiment here to see how fast I can talk and whether I can actually come anywhere close to hitting my mark. So I'm gonna take you through the topics as such. We're gonna talk about how many people in the country are engaging with digital audio, how many listeners are actually out there, both at the top digital audio listenership level and among podcasts specifically. All throughout this, I'm gonna talk about digital audio and then podcasts, a subcategory of it. How much time are folks spending when they listen to digital audio and when they listen to podcasts? And then, of course, how much ad money is already flowing, so we get a sense of how the advertising industry has responded so far. And in each case, we'll talk about the trends and the future projections as well, the outlook for all this. And then, so after that, if I hit something close to 15 minutes, we'll have a great panel discussion, as Rosie just suggested, and we'll talk about maybe what it all means, because I'm just gonna throw a bunch of data at you, and then we'll say, what are the ramifications of this on an operational level? How should we be thinking about this information? And then one big takeaway at the end. That was a little teaser for like the big conclusion that's gonna kick off our conversation. So let me start with the top line, the people. How big, how popular is this? You will, if you're here, probably not be surprised to hear that it is extremely popular. The answer to the question, how many people are out there listening to digital audio? A whole lot. So 2025, again, sorry, you probably know the eMarketer black and red color scheme. You're gonna get this is gonna be a chart and numbers heavy presentation, but I promise to try to keep it interesting and to move us along. 2025, 230 million people in the US are regular digital audio listeners. That is a very big number. If it feels big to you, it is big. And I'll have some context later to compare that to other digital media or just general media activities in terms of how many people are involved. The blue line is showing us that's 2/3 of the population. It's hard to get much bigger than that. The red line is the growth factor. That is very, very low, of course. I can't deny that there's very little growth in this space, but the reason there's very little growth in this space is because it is monumentally popular already, right? There isn't really any room at the top line for all that much more growth because we're talking about a media activity that basically everyone is doing already. It's gonna continue to tick up a little bit, right? But at this point, we're talking about as mainstream as you can possibly get. For podcasts, also extremely high. That big number that I just showed you on the last slide, 60% of those people are also podcast listeners. So if you are a podcast listener, you are by definition a digital audio listener. So we're talking about over 140 million people in this country that regularly listen to podcasts. That is also a very, very big number. It's not everyone, but podcasts are by no means a niche media anymore, right? Podcasts have arrived, as it were. Had this red line here you see is also low. This is the growth line once again. It's not quite as negligible though, right? Podcasting is still on an upward swing. There are still millions of people discovering podcasts every year. And as we'll see, they're also spending more and more time with it because there is a little bit more headroom for growth. Had this chart gone a little bit further into the past, this red line would have been gigantic, right? Podcasts really had that moment where they went from being sort of niche to being utterly mainstream. So 40% of the population is on board with podcasting. The ratio of podcast listeners to digital audio listeners is an important stat in the advertising world, which I'll come back to in a moment. So I promised you some context in terms of where this ranks, where digital audio ranks as opposed to any other potential media that we are all engaging with. And as you can see, pretty good, right? Number 2, this is basically, from eMarketer's perspective, a list of all the top things that we can be doing with digital media. And I've got a slide later that incorporates, this is basically only leaving out traditional media, like actually watching TV. Only social network, on social media, right? That's the only thing you think of that. Social media is probably the #1 most common way in our society today for people to engage with media. Digital audio, right behind it, right? Nearly as big. And more people listen to digital audio than watch the streaming services, right? All the Netflixes and Disney Pluses and Amazon Primes all put together, 230 million, more than that for digital audio. And then you see podcasts score out pretty well. Podcasts a little lower on the list, but still very, very high and ahead of some other very common and popular digital media-related activities. How am I doing on time? Okay. One important caveat. This slide is something that we have to include if we're going to holistically think about digital audio in the context of the advertising space. The reality is, and this is obvious, probably a lot of us do this, the reality is a whole lot of people are digital audio subscribers, which means they're paying money to avoid ads, or they're paying money to maybe have less exposure to ads. That is a very big number too, right? You gotta be aware of this, it's true. The growth here is actually also quite low. A lot of low red lines you're gonna see throughout all of my slides because we are talking about a pretty mature, fully successful industry here. So the growth rate for people who are paying to avoid ads has really come down as well because the digital audio industry suffers from the same subscription fatigue that the streaming services see, right? We're all getting sick of paying for so many things every single month, all these different services to avoid ads or just to have access to it. The same thing is happening in audio, but it is still quite a lot of people. And these are people that are increasingly difficult to access. They are not impossible to access though, because as I mentioned earlier, that podcast data point is important because podcasts pretty much always still include ads. This is just how the industry has evolved. So even if you're paying Spotify or whatever to avoid ads, you'll notice when you're listening to the podcasts, you're still getting ads. So that big number, the ratio of people in the digital audio world that are podcast listeners are pretty much accessible. And then among the full list of it, which is mainly music, it gets a little bit grayer. So we acknowledge this reality and keep an eye on it. There is conflicting pressures among the digital audio platforms about how they like to serve their clients or their customers. Time spent, moving along. So this is the engagement level. So we know there's hundreds of millions of people listening to digital audio and listening to podcasts. So how deeply, how much time are they spending with it? And once again, you will be unsurprised to hear that the answer is a lot. Right? This is extremely, in a positive way, an extremely time-consuming activity. 1 hour and 25 minutes per day, per person, among adults in the US for digital audio. That is a lot of time. That 11%, just over 11% of all time that all adult Americans spend engaging with media of any kind goes to digital audio. Now this figure, this 1 hour and 25-minute figure, is the average of the entire population, which means it includes the 100 million people or so for whom the number is zero, right? There are still a third of the country that does not engage with digital audio at all. So this average includes them. This is our sort of broad-based look. We also look at time spent with media in our forecasting analysis through the lens of just the active users. So the people, if we get rid of all those people for whom the number is zero, and we only look at the people that actively engage with digital audio, and I promise I will show you this momentarily, the amount of time spent per day is actually considerably higher. That's already a pretty high number, but it booms up quite a bit. Before I show you that alternative way of looking at time spent with media, we'll do the same for podcasts. It's a little bit lower, right? So we're talking about 25 minutes per day on average per person across the entire country because, of course, there are more people who don't listen to podcasts at all. So that drives the overarching number down to 25. But on this slide, we also, again, as with podcasts, the growth, this red line is the growth line on every single slide. We see the growth is still kind of substantial, right? So podcasts, people still are discovering podcasts. And people who already listen to podcasts are listening to more and more. They're spending more and more time with it. It's ticking up in a way that for a lot of other media activities, really across the board, social media and many other things, gaming, are not really moving. But podcasts are still moving, and digital audio overall is still moving a little bit. Here, as promised, is our comparison slide where pay attention to the red lines. The red lines are how much time people who actively engage with this are spending per day. So if you are a digital audio fan, this is actually a part of your life. This is something that you do. Or if you're a podcast fan, this is how much time you're spending. Almost 2 hours per day among digital audio active participants. And look what happens with podcasts. Actual podcast listeners are spending nearly an hour per day. So that more than doubles when we narrow that lens down to just the sort of target audience, the people that we know are involved, the accessible, addressable market, whatever kind of word you want to use. So these two red bars here also score out very well against the full range of potential activities that you could be doing other than listening to digital audio. This is sort of a complicated comparison slide because these are different cohorts of people. So the people that are still watching TV, the people that are gaming, the people that are listening to podcasts, this is how much time they spend per day. TV is still at the top. There's a narrative out there that traditional TV is fully dead already. It isn't quite fully dead. Although this eliminates all those. We know like a third of the country doesn't watch TV at all anymore, right? And I think this year we're saying that about half the country no longer even has pay TV. But among people who watch TV, they still watch 4 hours a day. Nothing's going to compete with that. Subscription OTT is the streaming services. Of course, if you sit down to watch a movie or TV shows on Netflix, that takes a little bit more time. But there's digital audio right there in third. And in this case, it's actually ahead of social media. So if you think about like how much time, the stereotype of how much time we all spend scrolling social media, people, digital audio listeners spend more time listening to digital audio than social network people spend on social networks. And I've got radio highlight. We're not here to talk about radio, but I decided to put radio in red just to sort of demonstrate that these audio options are very, very popular among the people that engage with them. All right, I'm coming down the home stretch here. Not quite going to make 15 minutes, but we're not doing too bad. So the ad spending. So how much money now is flowing to, I've just sort of set the size of the market for you in the engagement. How much money are we talking about is already heading this way? Quite a bit. $7.5 billion in 2025. That's a pretty good number. That is real money. This is a serious industry. That number is small compared to social media ad spending, which is up in like the 100 billion range, or retail media ad spending, which is in like the 50, 60 billion range. But this is still, it's not small potatoes. You already, again, had this chart gone a few years back into the past. This growth line there would have been some pretty serious spikes. The growth has started to settle, but it's not fully gone yet, right? We're still talking about high single digits. We're looking at 8.5, approaching 9 billion in the next few years. Decent, if unspectacular, growth. And a nice chunk of change heading towards digital audio. But as we'll discover later, I have some ideas about how much money that really is. And then I'll just show you the same thing for podcasts. The red here, these bars are the same numbers. This is the same number on the last slide in terms of the total amount of money that is flowing to digital audio. And the red is the share that is going to podcasts. And the takeaway here, if your eyes can sort of see it, is that the red is getting bigger more quickly than the gray is getting bigger, which is a sign that podcasts are taking a higher and higher share of ad dollars each year, although not spectacularly so. It's not grabbing up huge chunks, but podcasts are growing ad revenue more quickly than overall digital audio is growing ad revenue, although it's all going up. All right, I'm coming right down to it, and I promise the one big takeaway, man, this is pretty good. I'm gonna like barely go over 15 minutes, yes. The one big takeaway that's going to launch us into our discussion here is what happens when we mash together our time spent with media forecast and our digital ad spending forecast. And this is the big aha moment. What this shows, sorry about the title of this chart, that's like impossible to parse, right? But what this is showing you is the red lines are, as I mentioned, the share of all of our daily media time that goes to digital audio or podcasts. 11% of all of America's daily media time goes to digital audio. And this is the share of ad spending that the ad industry is sending to digital audio. So a pretty significant mismatch. We are spending a lot of time with digital audio, but the ad dollars that are flowing to it do not match that ratio. And we see pretty much the same scenario for podcasts. We spend over 3% of our time as a country with podcasts, but the ad industry only sends 0.7% of all of its dollars to podcasts. This is a pretty extreme skew. I don't have any slides comparing. We have this analysis for every possible type of media. You take my word for it. This is a very extreme skew. This is extremely unusual. There is not many other examples. Actually, I don't think there's any other example that you can find where the skew is this significant. Now, there are explanations for it. This isn't just a completely wild misshoot, right? There are reasons, but I am past my time, and I think maybe this is a good transition moment because we can talk about the reasons for all of this as a group. So I'm going to welcome, thank you very much, thank you. I'm going to welcome Rosie back up, and Matt, CTO of GroundTruth, our special guest, and then our special guest, Jeff, Vice President of Marketing from Gary's QuickSteaks. So you are going to hear all of them both respond to what they have seen just now, and then we've got a whole range of questions. Rosie, let's start off easy. Why? So I think I've sort of answered this question already, but we're all here because digital audio is this attractive new. It's not new. It's an attractive space that we're all interested in and getting into more deeply. What is your take on what you just saw and why?
Yeah, I mean, the last slide is so interesting, just seeing the difference between the time spent and then how much ad spend has caught up. For us, I think it is really, the game changer is the measurability of it. And the reason that we're investing in digital audio now is I think we certainly as consumers understand consumption and understand that that's where people are spending their time. We're omni-channel, but we want to make sure that we're adding value to these channels, right? So mobile, desktop, CTV, we can measure real business results on those things, like in-store visits. When we looked at audio and said, oh, this is a channel where people are spending their time and we always want to be able to provide our advertisers with ways to reach people where they are, it was also really important that we were able to measure that, right? And I think what's really unique about audio is it's this sort of historically top of funnel kind of awareness medium. And now we're able to make it more accountable and we're able to measure it. And one of the sort of end game goals for us at GroundTruth is to make the whole funnel accountable and measurable. So I think it's a really interesting time where the digital version of audio makes it targetable, measurable, all those things. So for us, that's how we're viewing it. And I think just narratively, our brands will say, even as a person, they're people. Our advertisers are ultimately people making decisions. They're spending their time there. They want to be in that channel, but they also want to know that they're doing it in a wise way. And for us, it just the moment now where so much digital transformation has happened just makes us able to add it into the media mix in a really compelling way.
Matt, so I'm hearing measurability. This is your space as I understand it. On a technical level, what do I need to know? You just got to hear everything I know. That's all I know. So tell me about measurability.
Yeah, so when we talked about this earlier, I promised that I would keep this like low nerd, but we have questions at the end. So it's actually relatively straightforward. So we'll see an ad on a device. We track the device ID that we saw that ad serve to. And then if we observe a visit to the location that the ad's driving to, we record that as an attributed visit. One of the things we did when we built the audio solution was we wanted to make sure we could differentiate between mobile devices and household devices like smart speakers, for example. So we came up with a solution that allowed us to actually graph speakers via IP address to household devices that also are connected to that device. And we can measure through household attribution visits as well. So we can differentiate between the devices, measure a visit, whether the ad was on a smart speaker like your Alexa or something, you're listening to a podcast on the way to work. The way we do that in terms of our methodology is a little different than what we see in the industry. It's not radio-based visit measurement. We create what are called blueprints. These are polygons on a map that we outline storefronts and other retail destinations to measure the visit within the polygon. So it's not just an estimate or a panel-based measurement. It's an observed visit that we actually see inside that polygon on the map. So we call these real visits. These are actually observed visits. They're not visits that we estimate. And I think that's what makes us a little bit unique, and we're able to do that now with, multiple devices.
And then Jeff will come. First of all, we can have an open conversation here. We don't have to come back. Everybody jump in. So if one of your colleagues says something that sparks an idea, jump right in. You don't have to wait for me to ask the next question. But Jeff, we'll come to you in just a moment. But Rosie, so he mentioned podcasts, and then I had a whole bunch. Every other slide, I was like, let me just make sure I talk about how this reflects in podcasts. Yeah. What's the role for podcasts in your perspective?
The role within digital audio.
Yeah.
Going back to something I said in the beginning, I think it's just so personalized, and I think it allows you to reach people when they're in a really engaged moment. So I think that's the headline. We get the question sometimes, well, I can skip the ads in my podcast, which you can, and I sometimes do. But the truth is about 70+% are not skipped. And you think about what you're doing while you're listening to a podcast, right? Like I put my phone down on the counter and I'm doing stuff around my house. I'm not gonna run back to the phone and skip the ad, right? You're listening to it. Or even if you're on your phone, I was on the train this morning, coming here bright and early, and I'm going through my email while I'm listening to a podcast. I'm gonna let that ad play, right? I'm not gonna go back to my podcast app, skip the ad, and go back into my email. So if you think about the behavior, people are listening to these ads and they're seamlessly embedded in the content that they're actively engaged in. So I think that's why podcasts, when you're listening to streaming radio as an example, there's a little bit of a difference between a song and an audio ad, right? But within a podcast, it's all speaking. It feels really seamless. And so I think that's why we see a lot of good performance and engagement and a good experience in the podcast world.
So on a personal level, podcasts are almost the most engaged I ever am.
Yep.
Although I've had these conversations with people, some people disagree. They zone out, or they're cooking dinner, or they consider it sort of a multitasking environment. But for me, like, if you're not listening, you're missing the whole point. Right? It's like if you're sitting there, this podcast is what you're doing right now. Or even if you're multitasking, but your brain is, at least for me, my brain is on that, even more so maybe than if I'm watching sports or if I'm watching a show, where you might not need to actually like completely lock in.
Yep.
Jeff, let's bring you in here. I've got a whole long sort of way to phrase this question, but I think what we're interested in is your experience with this.
Sure.
And so why don't you just walk us through?
Yes. So we're in a unique situation in that we have a lot of national distribution, but we lack brand awareness. And our target audience is 98% of the US population. So traditionally, we have done linear TV, linear radio. Last year, we moved to streaming television because of everything that Matt said, the targetability and the tracking. One of the greatest challenges that I have is proving the value of our brand building advertising budget to leadership to invest. So measuring is also a key component, and streaming TV provides us plenty of leads that drive measurable results, but we love the fact that we can hyper target, right, even to shopper characteristics, like specific shoppers where our product is being newly offered at. And then the trackability, right? We're getting to the point now, which I hope I'm not leaking anything, but where we're going to be able to track sales, actual POS sales from streaming TV, advertising, and audio. And so our rep wisely said, "What have you tried digital audio?" And I said, "No." And he told me all the things that we can do. And he told me that we can even track store visits and foot traffic. And I said, "Well, we got to try that." And so we did. So now it's just an integral component of what we do. And we're not currently doing any linear TV or linear audio because the digital is so targeted, and it helps me prove the ROI by showing foot traffic, which leads to incremental sales lift.
That's excellent. So I sort of have a follow for you, but
Yeah.
there's also more questions for Matt. And everybody, please cut in, ask it. Help me out here. So Matt, this sort of the future of ad measurement, and then the challenges that are in play. We're all painting a very happy picture here and everything that we say, and I had all sorts of positive things to say, but there are obviously challenges as well. So where do you see this going?
Yeah, so like current state with visits was the, when we built that solution and continue to build on that solution, it's the best possible signal to get as close as you can to the sale, right? Like we drove a visit there, we're seeing a visit in the store, but like Jeff said, we're also thinking about, well, what's the future? And certainly point of sale is a big one for us. So we've just finished a second wave of integrations with point of sale solutions so that we can start to track actual sales in store, so we can see how many of those visits actually ring the register. A big part of what our focus is in terms of measurement is around what we call real business results. These are, I call them IRL events, in real life things. This is us in real life right now, not on social media. That social media slide was actually awesome to see. So these real life events are the things that we're most focused on. So in addition to working on point of sale, we've also recently launched a new KPI metric called market share. So we see about 220 million visits a day in our ecosystem. And we're able to use those visits to associate them to different storefronts or different retail locations, categorize those retail locations. And we can see share of foot traffic to your location or locations compared to your competitors' locations inside of your market or trade area. So we can see how that foot traffic ebbs and flows in terms of market share and show you lift or maybe steady state market share associated to the ad spend. So that's how we think about measurement and attribution. It's what can we measure that's happening in real life that hopefully drives and impacts positively sales.
I think one of the challenges, though, to your question is what we hear is we don't have audio creative. I think that's a little bit of a barrier, right? Which we had in CTV. Sometimes everybody, like CTV became really accessible for even smaller advertisers who couldn't play on television previously, but there was such a barrier with creative for video. It's actually good timing with all these AI solutions too. There's a lot of companies you can tap into to help you with your AI creative, but we do hear that that's a barrier. I've actually never asked you this, Jeff, but how did you work on the audio creative, or how did you think about it differently than the rest of your assets?
We kept it real simple, and this is going to sound funny, but we simply took our TV spots and just made an MP3 out of it and used the audio, because we sat and listened to it, and I closed my eyes to the TV spot and thought, the only thing we have to change is when we say, see how it cooks so quickly. Right?
Hear how it cooks.
Yeah. And we didn't even change it because what it does is it forces them to mentally picture seeing it, right? And you can hear the sizzle. So we didn't change a single thing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it works.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So do you think that's the biggest barrier to entry? That was sort of, you guys preempted one of the questions I was going to ask.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, it's good.
I think the challenge is, like, don't overthink it, right? Like, okay, make the messaging intriguing and to the point, because you already have a highly engaged audience, as we spoke about. Yeah, I mean, and then target the right audience, right? Put the right message in front of the right audience on the right channel, and run a test campaign and see what you get. For us, it helped us extend the reach, and it brought in considerably more impressions, and often it's a lower cost per impression. So it's a no-brainer. It's an integral part of all of our branding campaigns moving forward.
So if we pull it out, I mean, we're looking to create a successful audio ad campaign. What does it take? Where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, I think that creative's the first piece, right? And we speak as a media company who is really, we're helping our clients reach the right people and serve on the right channels and measure results. But it really, I do think starts with creative. I love the idea of just like closing your eyes, seeing if it resonates is the first piece. And then I think, the better you can understand who your audience is and where it is, it all comes down to targeting too, I think. So it's those things. It does seem that it is really high performing as part of a mix, right? I think for you it's CTV plus audio, right?
And mobile.
And mobile.
And display. And retargeting.
Right. And you've seen performance increase when you do the plus.
Yes, multi-channel.
Right.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right. So I think that's a big piece of it too. Think about what other channels your audience is spending time on, and think about that blend, like the channel blend and how it can all support each other. And for you kind of found the recipe.
We did.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even mean the food pun.
That was good.
That was good.
I have one more that I just thought of on my own, and then we can open it up to Q&A after that, unless there's anything else you'd like to cover. But one of the elements that we are now starting to struggle with as we forecast the future of digital audio is the way in which it is blending with video now. Whether you're on Spotify and it tells you, do you want to just watch the video of what you're listening to? And then, of course, YouTube is now becoming this digital audio powerhouse, and just everyone is sort of intermingling video with audio, and you think that you're on one path, and then you find out you're on another. How are you thinking about that? And is this something that you have found a way to incorporate, or?
Yeah, I don't know that we have done much yet in sort of the video plus audio piece, just based on the platforms that we're serving on. But I do think it's interesting. I'm not a podcast watcher. I know that is a thing.
Neither do I.
And sometimes it probably is fun to watch these like people in a room doing interviews, especially when it's like an interview format with like an actor or something. But that is a thing, and that's how a lot of people are consuming that content now. So I think it's probably about that flexibility. You kind of have to serve all those consumption habits at once, and sort of like know that you're gonna hit, okay, I have a really compelling just audio ad if I'm not reaching the like also watcher audience. I think you probably have to be flexible and serve all of those behaviors. And also I think what we've learned it in other channels as well, is that, we talk about the intersection of an in-store shopper versus an online shopper, right? And some of our retail brands tell us that being able to measure in-store visits and in-store shopping is really compelling, because someone that shops both in-store and online is actually their most loyal retail shopper. So there's like an interesting intersection. And my point there is, you think about your own behavior. Sometimes I shop online, sometimes I shop in store. I'm doing things at different times for different reasons, and I'm not one or the other. And I think it's similar with audio, right? Sometimes you do want to watch the video format. Sometimes you're on the go and you're listening to audio. But as an advertiser, I have to have thought about both experiences so that I can reach you no matter what sort of like consumption pattern you're in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would also say on the back to the creative piece, when you think about modes of consuming audio, we've done some tests around companion ads, and we're going to be rolling this out in the future too, where we've seen better reach when you're using a creative that's not just audio. It also has maybe a banner or a still image or a video. You could actually use your CTV ads too. You could flip them into an audio ad as well. And then depending on the medium that audio stream is being consumed in, we've got the right creative to hit that impression at the right time. So that's also interesting. Is like, maybe you can upload just the whole video, and the audio stream plays when it needs to play, or the video stream plays when it needs to be played. So you can get some better reach with that as well. So that's also something we've seen, is this use of companion ads to kind of expand the reach and get better performance.
That's what I thought of when you were talking about hearing the sizzle. And now you're listening to a podcast, you're listening to music, the audio ad starts to play, and there's actually, the video is also playing. Your phone maybe is off, but if you were to look at it and go back into whatever app you're using, you actually are seeing the ad visually also, but it works.
Yeah.
Actually probably most people don't even know that or wouldn't be looking at it, but it works just fine as an audio. If you happen to look down, you're also seeing the video. I think that's sort of where Spotify wants everyone to go. Yeah. Great, any other things before I let the folks come at us? All right, any questions either about everything that we've just been talking about or anything from mine earlier as well? Great.
Hi. First, I want to thank you. This was very enlightening. And I definitely do think Big Brother's watching. And I have several questions, but I guess in terms of tracking product placement, especially in the podcast, because I know a lot of the podcasters are awarded by mentioning. How is that tracked within all of this as well?
Yeah, so mostly what we are talking about in this discussion is more programmatic, right? So those sort of like paid sponsorships by the talent or the host of the podcast, those are direct partnerships, and it's a little bit different. What we're doing is programmatic and not like baked into the show. So I believe it's more of that influencer relationship, that they're tracking their results in a different way. Yes. And that's interesting. That's a component of it, right? There's like the in-show hosts that are reading, and what we're doing it's a little bit different. But Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that the metrics for what we're seeing are more around obviously visits and attribution there, but also things like listen-through rate. We'll see that change, especially in the podcasting world, slightly based on podcast position. So you can choose ad positions, pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll, and we'll see different listen-through rate there. But then also reach, as well as household reach. If we're hitting a larger household, we like to show that metric as well. But those are the types of metrics that we tend to track for this type of programmatic buying.
And if that was a question also for the total amount of spending that goes into that, we have that data point too. And so we have a creator economy spending, influencer ad spending. We've got all that stuff now. Those are sort of subcategories.
That's a great point, though. There's a sub within a sub.
Sub within a sub within a sub, and that number is certainly growing very, very fast. It's not as big as the numbers that I showed for overall digital audio, but that number has grown up, and we do have that if you want to talk afterwards. Please.
Hi, I kind of wanted to add on to what you're saying here, and the question for the group, but also for everyone to think about, is about the scale of the way that digital audio programmatically complements what you're saying, right? I think as listeners, we think that it's mostly bought and sold directly to the publishers. But as you can tell from the slide there's actually a huge gap in the available inventory, that why partners like GroundTruth and others can sell the inventory, because it isn't being bought and sold to a capacity that is sold out, right? Like there is extra inventory available. And if you think about the economics of how the publishers and the publisher aggregators make money, they have to open up other ways to get other listeners and to aggregate in different ways. So my question for you guys is, are you seeing, what is the scale in terms of the places where you have ad availability across the funnel? Rosie, you said earlier we need to be accountable, which I thought was interesting, not performance-based and not awareness-based. So there's obviously scale here based on the chart. So I'm curious what those numbers are and how you think you can support it.
Talk about our inventory. So we've partnered with the biggest brands like iHeart or Odyssey, and we'll reach like 9 in 10 Americans every month on the different inventory we have available. So it matches to the scale that we saw on the slides for sure. So that inventory is always expanding. But right now it's pretty broad reach, even within individual audience segments.
So I have a client that has done more traditional marketing, a lot of email, direct outreach from their sales team, and I've gotten feedback recently from their sellers that their lead generation is way down because the marketing efforts they've been doing are not reaching like they once did. I know for a fact they're not in this space at all. They're a high-end lifestyle brand based in New York City. What recommendations would you have for a brand like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's nice about these things, opening up more programmatically is that you can test and try things without having a big spend commit. And I think especially for a brand that's used to traditional mediums where you do have to buy the big print ad and commit this money and then hope it works, the programmatic nature of this really does allow for more test and learn. I think, too, what's nice about, the audio channel for a high-end brand like that is, when you're speaking to a brand like that or an investment team, they want to feel like they know that it's brand safe. They can kind of see where it's going to show up, right? They're used to buying traditional media where it's in vogue and it's at this billboard and this spot. And I think audio lends itself to that, right? You can pick a genre, you can pick shows, you can pick brand household names and brand safe environments that feel a little more transparent and visible than maybe some other digital products, right? When you're buying mobile ads and we say we're reaching the person, not the content, right? And we know how to reach that person. Kind of don't worry about the publisher list. I think with audio, particularly with podcasts, you can think about the publisher. And I think that brands like that want to know they're spending their money in a way where like they can go listen to that and know that it's showing up in an environment they understand and can see. So I think I would think about it through that more traditional lens of household names and brand safety, but with investment flexibility, right? You can spend a little bit of money and see if it's working before you have to pour fully into that investment like you would in a more traditional medium.
Yeah, and I think also one thing we heard, in addition to wanting that targeting piece, is we want to see the proof in the reporting, right? So we built a podcast reporting solution so that you can see the different podcast titles that your ad actually ran on. So you get the full reporting, not only just on what you wanted to target and brand safe environments you want to appear on, but you can also then see the results to say, oh, these are in fact the titles I want to see. If you ever bought like CTV, for example, network level reporting is also super helpful for this. So you can see like the different shows that your ad appears alongside or the different brands that you're appearing within. Very similar with podcasts nowadays. So podcast reporting allows you to get visibility into where those ads are running.
I have a quick question. So you mentioned that having a companion banner or video expands reach, and I was curious to know a little bit more about like algorithmically why that is. Is that like, say I'm watching a podcast on my TV, am I more inclined to get served an ad that has a companion banner or a video?
Yeah, good question. So it's really just capabilities of the player. You can tune into streaming radio or podcasts on multiple players, right? Different apps, operating systems, devices, household devices, speakers, etc. And it's a filtering function. So if you don't have the creative to run when an ad impression is, potentially biddable or winnable, then you've completely missed out. So adding creative that actually expands your opportunity size has proven helpful. In terms of what companion ads are available, usually the players, they'll offer up just an audio ad, just an audible ad, or what's called a companion ad, which can include audio plus one or more visual elements. So you could have like a static graphic in there, like a traditional banner ad, a rich media ad, a video. And so when we see those impressions available, if we have the creative for that campaign, we can bid on that as well. So it's really just an expansion of, opportunity size for the audience that you're trying to serve to.
Hello.
Hey.
I have a client who is currently doing podcast advertising, but more on a one-to-one basis. And I'm trying to push them into programmatic. And they're worried that they can't afford it. And so is there a minimum that you guys look at or require in order to move forward? I mean, I know you're saying that you could spend less, which is what I'm trying to tell them to do. Like, let's prove it out and then move forward with that. But they're also very niche, and what they are offering is very different from their competitive set. So what we're finding is that explanation through audio and television is what's really working and driving results. And I'm trying to help them maximize what they're doing, but they're afraid.
Yeah. Jeff, do you have thoughts on how you thought about investing?
Yeah, I don't think there's a minimum. So run a test campaign, right? I'm a big believer in testing new strategies, new tactics, and see if the ROI is there. And if it is, then maximize it, right? Optimize and maximize, to your point. Yeah, test the waters. Run a test campaign.
What are the range of CPMs that you're seeing?
That's a good question. I put me on the spot. I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. But I'll tell you that the ROI is there, is the bottom line, right? We see incremental lift every time we do branding. What was difficult for me was the attribution piece, but now I'm able to attribute more compellingly and prove the ROI much quicker. And the ability to target, especially if it's more of a niche audience, the targeting is a huge piece of it because you're not falling on deaf ears or blind eyes. You're hitting that niche. So yeah, I mean, I always say don't be afraid to run a test campaign. And I don't think there's a minimum buy requirement.
No, there's not. We'll talk about CPMs
Yeah,
based on what you're trying to do. But there's not a minimum. I think it's just about like anything else. You want to know that you're spending enough to get a real read on if it's working or not. So that's just the balance of who you're looking to hit, and we can, if we understand it more, obviously give you recommendations on that, on the right share of voice to get an understanding of it, if it's working or not. But I think, to your point and yours, what's nice about it is that kind of low barrier to entry, and then optimize and maximize. I love that. I'm gonna use that.
Hi. She sparked me actually my question. How much flexibility you have in buying programmatic beyond selecting an audience, of course? Can you do contextual, like in podcast? I want this particular type of, not publisher, but type of podcast, like sport, comedy, or lifestyle might be more relevant for the brand you were talking about. And then so basically, what other alternatives beyond obviously targeting the audience you can do in podcasts in particular?
Yeah, so audience targeting is one way to do it for streaming, but then for podcast, there's kind of, Apple owns this. They've created this like set of 18 podcast categories. They own the name podcast. They should own the categories, and we support those 18. So you can target to specific types of podcasts, and then you can also target your ad to specific moments in the podcast as well. So I mentioned earlier pre, mid, post roll. But I'm curious, Jeff, do you have what do you choose when you're doing podcast targeting? Like, do you have a specific type of topic that you like to gravitate towards?
Barely, because our target audience is anybody who eats meat, which is
Right.
98% of the
Okay.
population. We don't have to, but we like sports and we like anything related to food or cooking, right? We're trying to target the shopper, the grocery shopper, which is typically the woman of the household, typically. So yeah, but we don't have to. We're finding we don't have to, but that would be what weuld gravitate to.
Yeah.
Like
The
Food
capability is
Network,
there.
sports, yep.
Related to that, cooking. What about time of the day?
You can do day parting. Yep.
Okay.
So very similar like segmentation capabilities for other types of programmatic advertising. So you can do day parting, day of week, hour, etc. Yep, that's supported also. Yeah.
We target weekends, grocery shopping,
Yeah,
Thursday
exactly,
through Sunday.
exactly. Yeah,
You bet. Yep.
I was really interested in what you were talking about, Blueprint and the polygon kind of geo fencing. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that, into what the difference is between what you're building versus just a standard or general geo targeting? And also, in terms of methodology, how are you able to say or define what an actual real visit is?
His favorite topic. Everybody strap in.
Go.
I don't know if I
Maybe
can
I
keep
struck a
this low
chord.
nerd. This might go high nerd. Okay,
Go high nerd, I wanna hear it.
Let's unpack. So you got two questions. First is how are the blueprints? How do they work? What's the deal?
Yeah.
So these are literal polygons around a retail area, around a store, right? So traditional radial is a pin on a map and you draw a circle. And that's great for targeting. If you're trying to find people within a X mile radius, or maybe you target to a specific zip code, which is a much broader polygon. What we're trying to do is, now you may still do targeting like that, but what we're trying to do is measure visits. And a visit needs to be something inside of a boundary. So we've polygoned all the businesses in the US, and we do it at 3 levels. We have a polygon around the business, we have a polygon around that business's parking lot, and the retail block if it's in like a strip mall or a retail center. And we can measure visits to any of those 3 levels within that polygon. So that's how we do the blueprint thing. Is that helpful? Okay. Yeah. All right. So that's what we call blueprints, and we use that for measuring visits. The way we measure visits and the methodology is also a little bit different. So when we see a ping from a device inside of that polygon, we record it, but we don't treat it as a visit yet. What we call that internally in our system a sighting. And a sighting is cool, but sightings have different scores. They come in from different publishers, different data providers, different apps, et cetera, right? So what we look for is density of sightings. So if we see 1 sighting, that's interesting, it's a data point. But if we see 2, 3, 4 sightings of that device in that boundary in a certain segment of time, that's a visit, right? So we use that density to determine what we call in our system a true visit. And that's an observed visit. That's not a panel-based, projected, we think this may have happened type of thing. Like, that device was there, according to 4 publishers. So we have to let the data pool a little bit to do that. It can't be done in real time because we need to see the sighting. Maybe that ping comes in an hour later or a day later on a delay or something like that. And as the data pools, we're able to pull out those multiple sightings, and then we score them, and ultimately that becomes the visits that you see in the attribution report for all the media you run on the platform. Okay.
That wasn't too bad.
That wasn't bad? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We have a little more time if anyone has anything they're thinking about asking.
All right, I'll ask you.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of In terms of consumption of the media, we talked about people multitasking. Certainly, commute and travel and transit is, I suspect, a very high percentage. One, how can you really target or explain engagement? Because certainly I know when we all are driving, we space out, which is really bad, but yes, we do that. Don't get behind me in the car. And also in terms of sort of what you were talking about in the previous question, I'm in transit, I'm moving. So you're going to see me potentially go through different blueprints anyway. So how do you decipher what's true engagement?
I could take the engagement piece, or at least offer my thoughts to it, and then you guys correct me. I think that there is sort of a baked-in engagement or viewability understanding with most media channels, right? Billboards, digital out of home. What's the guarantee someone that you're saying was impressed actually looked at that board as they drove by, right? Even things like CTV and television, there's so much data on the fact that people are co-viewing and they're also on their phone while they're watching television or connected television. I think some of the anecdotal data on co-viewing and how people are consuming these channels or how really truly viewable something is helpful. And with audio, there's not as much anything, right? You're not also watching television. You're not also consuming another medium that's splitting your attention. So I think some of the just narrative data around what people are doing when they're consuming media is helpful. And if it's an advertiser objection, reminding them that there's some baked in maybiness in a lot of these channels, and that's why a blend of channels is so important, right? Let's buy the billboard, but let's also buy the audio spot, but let's also buy the CTV ad. So I think consumer behavior, and as we understand it more, how people are doing it is going to be helpful just to make those proof points. I forget the other piece was travel and how we look at visitation signals within blueprints on sort of an ongoing basis. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I talked about sightings, right? So if we see pings, we also get a speed on that ping. And if it's anything more than walking, we usually throw that sighting out. It's kind of that simple. That's why we let the data pool, so we can look at all the characteristics of that ping to understand, how fast was it moving? Is it an erratic ping? Did we see a ping here and then a minute later 2 miles away? Well, that's not real. Throw that away, right? So we do a lot of filtration on the visit signals that we see so that we can get something that's very, tangible and trustworthy. We apply trust scores to these things too. So a lot of what you're talking about would just be thrown away. Yeah.
John, can I ask you how you think about, you're looking for channels where people are engaged. How do you think about audio versus other things you're buying or considering?
It would be slightly secondary to video, right? Our best engagement is if I could just do a demo and cook for you right now, right? And then you could buy it like a in-store demonstration, right? Because you get all the senses. You get sight, you get hear it sizzle, you get to smell it, then you get to taste it, and then you can buy it, and I can give you a coupon. So it kind of works in that order, right? Television's seen first, but you also hear, right? And then after that, I would say it's probably audio, right? Would be the next one. And then after that, it would be display, right? Without anything but just seeing the product. But yeah, that's kind of our priority. But they all work because, again, we're just trying to, for us, since we only have 15% national brand awareness, it's all about customer acquisition. It's all about introducing it. Again, 98% of the people eat sirloin steak. So, hey, have you heard about us? Ours cooks from frozen in 3 minutes, and it's incredibly versatile, and it's 100% sirloin beef. Well, I've never heard of that, but that sounds good. Okay. So then when they go to the grocery store and they see it going down the aisle, or they see it in the in-store secondary demonstration or in the bunker with a big old display, they go, I heard about that. The Sizzle Flip Saver. I'm going to try that, right? That's it for us. It's when they go to their weather app on their phone, and then when they see the TV spot, and then when they hear it when they're listening to Spotify or a podcast on Joe Rogan or whatever, right? We're just trying to get that. What's the magic number? Is it still 7 to 10 touches, impressions? That we make a lasting impression.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry. We got great.
International company, do you guys have inventory in various languages, and can we select those?
We do actually. We're rolling out a Spanish language targeting. Our inventory is in the United States, domestic U.S., but we are rolling out language targeting. Yes.
Easy one. Short. Let's see.
Love it.
Let's go.
Internationally, are there issues? Are you able to geo-target internationally with the polygons, or is that like an issue in Europe with GDPR?
It is an issue in Europe. Yes. It's an issue in some states in the U.S. too. Privacy is like a whole other thing, but so we are super aware of the different regulations we need to follow in the U.S., and we feel like that's our sweet spot. So we're focused in the U.S. But yeah, Europe is a whole other tricky place.
How about California?
Yep, California. Yep. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we keep abreast of these different regulations. We have to because of what we do, and we treat, frankly, pings and location signals and also targeting in different states a little differently in our system to accommodate for that. And I think what we found is that's work enough on its own. So our focus is the U.S. primarily. Yeah.
Every time I think we're running out, somebody sneaks in. You can do so again. Rosie, any last final thoughts to take us home?
I think this was great. I think it's been interesting to see this channel catch fire so quickly. Like, a lot of us have been in this industry for a while, and it was like teaching people about mobile was like, took a while, right, Whitney? And CTV, just to see the adoption of, okay, we get it, people are spending time there, but the adoption of ad spend, I know it's not there yet, but we know part of that dynamic is also because there's not, there are paid subscriptions that are taking a lot of the share. But I think the adoption has just been so interesting to see it catch fire so quickly. For us, it's really been a game changer for our clients to know that we can measure real business results off of something that felt very top of funnel. And it's been great. And I think to Jeff's point, it should be part of the mix. So I think it's about testing and learning and finding what works for you, like what's your plus, in terms of media channels. But excited to see where it goes. And we're continuing to innovate. We're continuing to see how we can add value to that channel. Something we talk about a lot is, people are spending time on social and on other things, but if we can't add value to something, we're not gonna invest in it, and we're not gonna bring it to market and just be another player in that space. And I think we really do have something differentiated, and we'll continue to innovate in that direction. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. Everyone listen to your favorite podcast today. Don't skip the ads. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.